May we see your papers?
I don't think I have them on me.
In that case, we'll have to ask you to come along.
Wait, it's possible that yes. Here they are.
These papers expired 3 weeks ago. You'll have to come along.
Halt!
Has started issuing real IDs. They're basically an enhanced driver's license that makes getting through security when you're flying a little bit easier. Aaron Breen joins us now from the DMV office on Galletti Way tonight to sort it all out for us. Aaron?
It is a little bit confusing, Kristen, but as we all know, you have to have some kind of ID to get on an airplane, and a lot of people use driver's licenses, which are issued by the DMV, right? Those have been just fine, but about a year from now, that's all going to change. You'll either have to have a passport or you'll have to have a real ID card. Those are given out by the DMV, but when you come in to get one, you need to bring the right documentation to the DMV. Which is important to know before you get here, as it can be a bit of a hassle.
I've been here twice, and I got to be sent home one more time because my passport's expired and I don't have the stamp on my marriage license. So I got to go through, I said, my steel box and find that.
But Darlene says the wait has actually been short, and this will all simplify things for her later on. She's right about that, and that's the case for anyone who uses their license instead of, say, a passport for ID.
It's a choice. You don't have to get a real ID card, but if you want to get on an airplane after 2016 or sometime in there, you're going to have a real ID card.
Or a passport. So what is a real ID card? Well, it looks a lot like your driver's license, but that star and the gold circle around it showed that the DMV has checked out your background.
These cards have security features in them, and that's the whole idea behind this, to make our licenses more secure, so that when someone presents a license, if it has that gold star, the white star and a gold circle, we've been able to verify those documents, and that's something that we never had in the past.
Again, it's a choice. Without the documentation, you can still renew your license as usual. Instead, it will say on it, not for federal official use. So if you opt for it, what do you need to bring with you? Well, you need original documents, just like applying for a passport.
You have to establish your identity, your residency, and also Social Security. So those documents you have to, and on our website we would encourage people to go and look at the list. It's very exhaustive of all the documents you can use to verify those things.
Now the biggest question of all, which is when does all this take effect? Well, that decision is a federal decision. It's up to the TSA to make, not the DMV's. It's up to the TSA. The closest we could get from them today was merely to say it won't begin before 2016. So it's at least a year away to do that. It's something to think about when you are renewing your license, when it comes up for renewal, and the technicians are supposed to ask you which way you'd rather go. If they don't, you should ask them. And of course, if you're going to go with the real ID, you got to bring the documents with you and be prepared. Covering the story, Aaron Breen, Channel 2 News.
In May of 2005, in a military appropriations bill, the Real ID Act was buried within. What is the Real ID Act? Well, it requires that all states follow a federal guideline for state identification cards, or your driver's license. Many states at the time stepped up and opposed this unfunded mandate, and activist groups across the nation raised their voice in opposition as well. Not since Obamacare has such a policy been so controversial. Our guest today is Susan Posel. She's the chief editor and founder of the USindependent.com. She's our guest on the show today. Here to talk to us now about the latest developments in the Real ID fight across America is Susan Posel from the USindependent.com. Susan, for our viewers that don't know about Real ID, can you give us a brief introduction to it?
Real ID is RFID chips inside your driver's license. It is Wi-Fi capable, so if you are utilizing a Wi-Fi signal, you can access the information. Exactly how much of our personal information is included on that chip is unknown, and it is assumed that potentially from birth till present, all of that information could be downloaded and stored on that chip. It's more information than we have on the magnetic strips right now, and that is the crux of the problem. How much information should an agency have if they have access to your driver's license?
The new legislation, the national ID card is in it. It takes 3 or 4 pages to describe, and it will be connected with our driver's licenses. The states will be instructed on exactly what they have to do. Social security numbers will be used. Some type of a physical proof, such as fingerprints or retinal prints, have to be on it.
Giuliani had a line last night that I'm not sure many people noticed, but it had to do with a national ID card. It was within the context of a debate about immigration, and he said we need a tamper-proof ID card and a database that figures out who they are, immigrants, why they're here, and whether or not they're legal. That's a national ID card. Are you for that?
Absolutely not. I voted against the Real ID. I think the Real ID is the national ID card. It's essentially going to be introducing the notion that we will be carrying our papers. You can't do that, gather that much information in an ID card for illegal aliens or Hispanics and not include everybody. It just doesn't make any sense. So the age of carrying our papers and national IDs, it's here, and I am concerned about that. It's all done in the name of safety. Everybody's frightened to death, and if you don't sacrifice your liberties, you can't be safe. And yet the dangers exist, but they're not quite bad enough, and they never should be bad enough to sacrifice liberty. There's no reason to sacrifice liberty in thinking that you're going to be safer.
So just sum it up for me in 3 sentences. If you get in an argument with someone about the national ID card, the response you're likely to get is, well, gee, the credit card companies have a lot of information on you, and you don't feel like your liberty is being abridged because of that. Why is a national ID card a threat to liberty?
Well, one is private and one is government. I don't want the government snooping on me. I would give my fingerprint to Continental Airlines, the airlines I fly, in order to get through the line and to be assured that I'm a safe passenger. But I don't want to do it with the government. The government is there to protect privacy, not to invade our privacy. Now our government, it does more to protect their secrecy, and they violate our privacy. So there's a big difference between a credit card company. If they violate our privacy, then you can use the government to enforce laws because they promised me to keep my privacy confidential. So there's a big difference. It's sort of like the government shouldn't have your medical records, but I as a physician can have access to your medical records, but I better not violate that confidence.
Amen. Yeah, I hope you can come on regularly just for a tutorial on what it means to be free. Dr. Paul, I really appreciate your coming on. It was a great explanation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And then we should develop a tamper-proof ID card. And then if you got the tamper-proof ID card, you'd be allowed to work, pay taxes, get online, become a citizen, follow the rules.
The Real ID, or the Real ID Act, is a national ID card that will contain a data chip that will contain your social security number, your political status, health records, firearm registration if you have one, police records, fingerprints, and your retina scan. Also, a corporation would be allowed to require you to have the national ID card or the Real ID to shop at their store, or to fly in a plane, or to open a bank account, or to buy a gun, or to drive a car, or enter a federal building. Now, the Real ID Act is going to go to a state-by-state vote. It's already been through the Senate, and it was passed 100-0. And it went through Congress, and it was almost unanimously passed there also. The bad news is John McCain, Hillary Clinton, and Barack Obama all passed the Real ID Act. Now, the only person that ran for president and voted against it was Ron Paul. The worst part is, even if your state decides not to have the Real ID, you will not be able to fly in a plane to another state. You won't be able to enter a federal building, and you will not be able to drive in another state. And that's if your state turns it down. Most states are going to vote for it, and eventually, maybe, some are speculating that the chip that is already in the new passports supposedly tracks you, would be put in the national ID card. But you could be tracked even with the new one, as it is said to be as going to be created, because you just would have to come in within a certain distance of a receiver, and it would track that you're at the Walmart at 4:30 p.m. on December 2nd or whatever, and it would go into the state's databases that they're going to have for all the information that is going to be in these chips. And if you, instead of tapping your phone, they can just tap your card, and they can tap your phone also, but they can just track wherever you go, whatever you buy, whatever you have, and it's almost anything, and they can find it out within seconds. It'll just be in a giant database with no warrant needed to find out almost everything about you.
So how many states now have risen up in opposition? I know that in 2005, as I mentioned earlier, there was a massive outcry. DHS kept pushing the deadline back. So where are we now since the bill was introduced back then?
Well, what concerns me is the amount of states that are in compliance. Alabama, California, the District of Columbia, Oregon, Rhode Island, Wisconsin, Virginia. The list of compliant states is overwhelming. There's only a handful, maybe 5 or 10, that have not since complied. And Alabama has just released very quietly the STAR ID, which is their answer to this national identification with chipping. They expect that by 2017, all residents in the state of Alabama will have their chip inside their driver's license, or it will be difficult to identify yourself.
Right, the article you posted here, Alabama RFID cards, how biometrics help DHS fight terrorism. How actually does biometrics fight terrorism? I mean, we just did a report on an 83-year-old nun that broke into a nuclear facility. She cut the fence. She went in and with 2 other people, and they splattered blood all over the facility there. And this is an 83-year-old nun. So how if this woman can get in and cause this type of damage to a military installation, how is biometrics on RFID cards going to help terrorism or fight the war on terror?
Well, the fact of the matter is, and you and I know this, it's not. What it's going to do is cause a huge database profiling system that is more efficient than the ones that they use now. The DoD uses Biometrics Identity Management Agency as a way to identify the enemy, and they justify this by making all of the government and private secure businesses more secure in their data mining. But what this does is it creates a scenario where if you have access to that card, if you have to swipe it or give it over for whatever reason, that entity, whether it's private or governmental, has access to all the information on that chip. And like I said before, how much information is on there? Is it more information than what they can include on that magnetic strip? And this also ties into what's been going on with the Target breaches, because they're decrying that the magnetic strip is part of the problem. That's why you have the point-of-sale hacks. If they were chipped...
You're speaking of the Target department store.
Right, exactly. So if they had the chip-to-pin cards, just like they have in Canada and over in Europe, the Target breach would have never happened. So we have this strong movement toward having everything on a microchip. And like I said, how much information is included, we're not clear, and they're not telling us. So I would assume...
So how do these cards then play into the whole NSA data mining program? If people are voluntarily allowing these cards with RFID chips embedded in them for their state IDs, how does that play into the NSA data mining?
How it plays in is if you have a Wi-Fi signal, you can tap into the chip and download all of the information. Now, the Google cars use Wi-Fi signals when they go through your neighborhood and take pictures. Police officers who are sitting patrolling your neighborhood or just driving around, they have Wi-Fi capability, and potentially they can tap into it. It has geolocation capabilities, which means potentially through satellites and probably through observational drones that they have in the skies, they could watch you walk down the street because you have this card in your back pocket.
Now, the state IDs that have these RFID chips in them, the ones that are compliant with the federal standards for Real ID, The Founding Fathers designed this country to be separate and independent states that would contribute to the federal government and make up the United States. So when a state falls into a federal mandate for an identification system, do these ID cards go against the perhaps founders' intent for the division of government in the United States?
Absolutely. And it's a violation of your Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights. You have the right not to incriminate yourself. You also have the right to not be victim of illegal searches and seizures. When they take information from you from one digital source to another, whether it's a governmental agency or a hacker, that is information that you have the right to. You did not have an expectation that your privacy would not be maintained. So let's say that they're driving through your neighborhood and tap into a Wi-Fi signal and take information from any credit cards that are chipped. That is a violation of your Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights. If they use any of that information to initiate any sort of action against you, whether criminal or civil, that information should be fought in court because it was seized without a warrant and without probable cause.